to attract those cast names, and if you want to, particularly, I mean, I've done it, I've worked with established filmmakers like Stephen Frears, but I've also worked a lot with first-time directors. And if you want to help launch someone's career, and you've got to limit the risks. You've got to mitigate the risks, and one way of doing that is to try and keep the budget down, because it's very difficult to attract, certainly in the UK, attract big casts when you're dealing with new talent. So I would say anything in the six-figure range, but the lower the better. And that way you have a chance of financing the film without necessarily relying on a big element of pre-sales with distributors.
I mean, discussing the other end of that spectrum, and I know within the promotional literature for today, the range was 10 to 30. I mean, first thing we all said when we met in the room back there was micro at 10 million, I wish. And if we were to talk about the $30 million end of the market, you are talking about the absolute furthest that an independent would probably go.
Explain why that is.
Well, it just, to try and pull together that level of money from the independent sector without any studio support, I would say is prohibitive. But, I mean, if there have been a couple, I think Studio Babelsberg had one that was topping out at the sort of mid-40s and stuff, but you're into studio town as soon as you're sort of beyond that $30 million mark, I think. Or one of the mini majors, one of the big sort of relativity.
Not relativity.
Freudian slip. Sorry, Ryan. So I mean, I think in the UK at the moment, micro is, as Robert stated, sort of sub £500,000. I think your mid-level goes from that up to probably 5, maybe 6, and anything beyond that we would consider a very well-financed British independent film, and that you are going to need a director that moves the needle for sales. You're going to need definitely 3 or 4 casts that are going to be meaningful in terms of international appeal. And once you're into that sort of 3D chess game where we all earn our money, the complexities are just so much more enhanced.
Mimi, do you have something to add to this?
I would say the range on micro is the same in the US in dollars, that it's sort of under the 500,000 and below level is what we would consider micro. I think that the 10 to 30 range is there's a big difference between 10 and 30, both from how the films are put together, how they sell, etc. So I think to lump anything in the 10 to 30 range together is a little too broad. I do think there are the bigger budget ones. We sold, when I was at Hyde Park, we sold Ghost Rider 2, which was at the $70 million range. And that was certainly an independent film, but we had the US, we had a studio on board for the US with a screen commitment. So that puts it, as you were describing, into the studio world, but sold in the independent side. So you can go above that and you can sell above that on the international side, but it's a rare bird.
So what is the studio's role in this now? I mean, they used to make mid-budget movies. Now they don't. So you guys are sort of filling that gap on some level, but what I'm hearing, and what I think is true, is that the budgets are much lower than the ones they used to be involved with. And do they come in and do they pick up movies?
I mean, I think that there's a huge vacuum in that space at the moment. And I agree with you. Sort of 10 to 30 is too broad. It's probably need to be broken down into 5s within that. And I think there is a real lack of appetite within the studio structure to be sort of making the films at around about the $30 million mark, which means it does fall to independents like us to take on the challenge of trying to put those sort of pictures together.
And how hard is that now? How difficult is it?
Oh, no more difficult than it's always been. I mean, it's never been easy. It's always difficult, and whether it's more difficult now than it has been, I don't know. It's just always been difficult. I think it's very difficult as an independent filmmaker to achieve an ongoing momentum. Even when you've done big films like you always, I don't know if you agree, but you always feel after one film like you're kind of back to starting from square one and having to put the wheels back on the truck again and start. It's very hard. It's very hard to turn the independent filmmaking hobby, if you like, into a business model.
All right. So how are the agencies allies or not allies in this process?
Can I just check? Are there any agents in the room? Because this will heavily flavour how I answer the next couple of questions.
I highly doubt it.
Okay. but they may have spies.
I want you to be honest about this, because I think the agents are what everyone has to deal with.
Okay, well I refer to CAA's office as the House of Disappointment. So I think, you get good and bad within all of these agencies. The problem is that they are so, in their own belief, insightful at tracking people suddenly sort of rising through the ranks and on a trajectory to something that someone that we might have been able to offer $200,000 to appear in the picture within a heartbeat, within one film, will be unreachable for less than 2 or 3, and they're so quick at picking up those people and putting that value on them. And I think, it's not just the agencies. I think the other, to echo Robert's point, it is and has always been tricky, and there are different things that change. And I think the emergence of sort of high quality TV has been a real issue around talent these days, because it used to be, I think 5-10 years ago, you had film people and you had TV people, you had film directors and you had TV directors. Now it's a real badge of honour to be able to cross that divide. And if you look at some of the stars that are now going to 6-9 month commitments with TV shows, they used to be able to do 4 or 5 films in a year. And now they can do a TV show and 1 independent. So I think there is it's not talent drain, it's a talent sort of vacuum that the quality TV market has given us.
I'm not going to give a pro-agency speech, but I think it's very easy for independent filmmakers to go, to feel hard done by, in a sense, or to feel, and it is very difficult. But when we say on the one hand that distributors want stars and they want signature directors who are going to attract those stars, it's quite obvious that the agents more and more hold the power in the game. And
they're filling the void that was left by the studios
with
packaging and so on.
Yes, absolutely. And the studios have always been the bread and butter of the agencies. And as the studios have made less pictures, but do a smaller number for bigger budgets, they still obviously control access to the talent. The stock of the talent goes up in the independent market, and therefore the power of the agencies goes up. And they have very cleverly worked out ways of essentially not just monetizing their clients, but monetizing lots of different other sides of the deal. So as you say, if I'm an independent producer and I'm trying to put together a $10 million or a $12 or a $15 million film, I need cast, and I can spend 3 years trying to get that cast, or I can go and try and set up a packaging deal at the agency or whichever agency, pay them the fee as much as it may hurt, but it just becomes another line item in the budget. So if you think about it like that, it's not so painful.
Well, they work with you.
And then they work with you. And I think, when I was in the 90s, when I was making films, particularly in the UK, you kind of relied on agents to be nice. I mean, and I don't mean that in a daft way, because they were very supportive. If you had a project that an agent that you worked with liked, they would really go out on a limb to help you get cast. And particularly in the UK, where there wasn't big studio business. But it's kind of all changed now. There isn't really, even with the UK, any meaningful star name or meaningful name also has American representation. So you're not just dealing with a UK agency, you're eventually always dealing with the Americans. So we're all caught in that thing, and we have to recognise it and work with it, and that's the way it is.
I mean, that packaging aspect is an emergent thing in the UK. In fact, that's what we're doing on Steel Country, because 2 reasons. One, we have quite an accelerated timeline to try and get into production, and sort of being able to get into 3 lead roles through one agency where the coverage goes around quite quickly, and if you can get them excited, then that buzz starts to go around the water cooler within the agency. But like you say, then they turn around and hit you with a packaging fee, which, as long as it's sensible, you don't mind paying if you've had the efficiencies of time.
One of the things that I always worry about, though, is if you are looking at foreign sales and you're going to each actor, each element, each piece of talent has a value, and it depends. It makes a difference in terms of what kind of budget you can actually raise. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what are the risks of the kinds of controls that the foreign salespeople put upon you in terms of what they're willing to give you?
Well, I think we have control only to the extent that the financing relies on pre-sales. Because if you need to be able to do pre-sales to put your financing together, the list is getting shorter and shorter of pre-sellable names. That speaks to the power that the agents have, is that the cast is becoming the most singular, most important thing in pre-sales. Going back to the micro-budget question, most micro-budgets are not going to have big names in it. So the pre-sales on those are extremely limited. It's usually execution dependent, so it's everybody, producers, sales agents, talent are sort of along for the ride of, is this going to work? But it's a giant gamble. As you get into the bigger budget, or the Medio as we're calling it here, you can have names attached, and there's a short list of names, more men than women, that are real pre-sellable titles. And I work closely with the producers that we work with in terms of ranking names in terms of foreign sales value. We never provide the list because I don't think the sales agent should be in the creative role. But if we are working with a producer, we will go through and sort of talk about names, because it really is, at the moment it's changing, I would say every 6 months in terms of who's valuable, who's not.
Isn't there a kind of a lag? Like Robert Pattinson, everyone with a brain knew that guy was going to be a major star if they had seen Twilight, but no foreign sales agent would touch him until later. Do you see what I mean?
And he's now slightly cursed by the lack of performance on the road, even though it's a brilliant role. I mean, he absolutely smashed it. But that's a show that made £2.5 million worldwide, dollars, sorry, in terms of.
So his value's been going up and down.
Yeah, I think they do fluctuate. I mean, I know the audience would love some sort of top tips and sort of the holy grail of how to do this. I mean, one of the things that Mimi points to is that conversation with the sales team, because it is ever changing. It's only really those that are at the coal face of international sales that can really accurately tell you whether someone's hot or not, or if they're mediocre, what that means in the context of the rest of the cast. So it's something I really promote is you know, if you can win over an agent or two, you're on a good road. If you can win over a friendly sales agent that will be prepared to run numbers off the record for you on a no quote, no prejudicial basis, then those are 2 bits of intel and relationship building that's really, really useful.
But wouldn't you say that there's a danger for any producer that they would put a movie together with the wrong cast?
That's never happened. I just don't believe that's ever happened.
Liv Tyler, she's great in Japan.
There is an old adage, I don't know how old it is, but it's producers look forward, distributors look back. And you know, everyone wants their little bit of comfort. And when you kind of delve into why it is the way it is. I mean, I started off as a distributor, even I was selling videos over the phone before in the olden days. But you know, when you speak to distributors and you realise how films are sold in to the exhibitors, how exhibitors make their choices of what they're going to book, you get to the root of, I won't say the problem, but you get to the root of the situation. They book films on posters. They book films on the name on the poster. And that is why a sales agent has to respond in that way, because that's the way the distributors respond. Because ultimately, it's very, very difficult with the pressure on screen space and to get your film in there. And if you're a distributor, you obviously want to walk into the exhibitor with the best possible package. As a producer, what you want to do is make the balance. I mean, when I'm in The Usual Suspects, we had a list of pre-approved names from Polygram. We managed to get like 40 names pre-approved for the 5 main roles, which gave us a great degree of latitude. But we still wanted to put a couple of names in there who at least might give a bit of comfort to a distributor, and then be able to take chances on an unknown, Benicio del Toro, as he was at the time, an unknown. And it's just trying to strike that balance. But we have to understand that ultimately that's how exhibitors make their choice, and also to a certain extent that's how the general public make their choice.
But I know friends who are independent producers, and I get depressed sometimes at some of the compromises that they're willing to make to get the movie made. That's always the argument. This is how I'm going to get the movie made. Well, suppose you make a bad movie. Then what happens?
No one sets out to make a bad movie. No one.
Tell them the risks. Tell them exactly what's going to happen. You're going to end up in Never Never Land. You're never going to sell the movie, right?
Oh yeah, that's quite possible. Well, I mean, look at the number of films that are made versus the number of films that are released.
Right now, it's a big difference.
Do the math, as you would say here. Do you say in Canada, do the math, or do you say do the math?
Do the math, eh?
But that's that, you know, and it's not necessarily even that they're bad films. It's just that they are not marketable films.
But I also think the international buyers, the distributors who then need to turn around and sell it in their territory, also appreciate that you don't want some sort of hodgepodge that's come together for economic reasons but makes no creative sense. I mean, our buyers are pretty sophisticated in terms of being able to evaluate a script, the cast that you're presenting them. They don't want to see a name in there just for the sake of the name. Those days are gone where you could stick them on the front of a DVD and sell it that way. So they're becoming, I think, for some.
For a VOD title.
Right, I'm talking, I agree. But in the cinematic stuff, I think the distributors have seen some of those films that have been sort of pasted together. And that's why I think you have to leave the creative control with the producers and the filmmakers, and then work on the international sales value. Because I think those two can only go hand in hand. You can't say, you know, this week Gerard Butler is great and Emily Blunt is great, so we're going to put them in, you know, I don't know, yeah, exactly, thank you, yeah. And it's you know, it's
the sequel.
Yeah, exactly.
Put the witch down.
Right. So that's I think you have to work together to make a good film, because ultimately that's what it's about.
I mean, the other thing that you have to recognise is that, you know, the world is a disparate place, and when you try and homogenise and put together a one-size-fits-all cast on a one-size-fits-all material that you think is going to sell out the whole world, that's not going to work, because something that works great in the English language territories such as North America, Canada, Australia and the UK will be of one type. You know, the French market is incredibly director driven, possibly even more than cast. You know, the German market loves their big action. We know that a lot of the Asian markets really love their genre, their horror and their stuff. So I think the worst thing you can do as a producer is when you're trying to do a checkbox exercise in coming up with a film that's going to sell internationally. That's where that creative danger, I think, you come up with.
All right, so the other creative danger would be having investors who have control over the project, right? Is that something to worry about? Is it a good thing to have equity investors who are in control?
Equity investors. Well,
Explain the different kinds of investors.
Those investors are. I mean, I'm a financier, but I wouldn't consider myself to be overbearing because I produce films. So I know what it's like to produce films, and I do it, and I still do it. So I think if you are relatively savvy as an investor, you want the producer to be in charge, because when the shit hits the fan and when push comes to shove and all of those other sayings, there is one person in the middle of that whole process that is going to do anything it takes to get the film made in the way that they've always hoped it will be made, and that's only ever going to be the producer. And that's possibly where independent producers kind of come into their own, because the good ones are incredibly dogged. So the ones who are your friends who say, what am I going to do to get this film made? I would say that the norm is actually the opposite.
Reducing the budget to get the cast you want?
Exactly. Well, yes, it's looking at other ways of retaining the creative integrity of what you want to do. Unless it is like a VOD title that is a more, I won't say cynical, because it's just a more commercial exercise. You know, for a certain type of film that the market will pay a certain level. We get involved in films as a financier, where we know that a certain budget is achievable with a certain list of elements. There are producers around who are very good at doing those things. They make 2, 3, 4 films a year, and they know the parameters, and as long as they hit those parameters, they can make them. And you know, they're never going to win any Oscars. But that's not necessarily your average independent film model. Your average independent film model is the King's Speech, which
average?
No. What I'm saying is that in 99 out of 100 galaxies wouldn't have worked, but in this one, all the stars were aligned, and it was a massive hit.
And a lot of distributors passed on it, right?
Well, of course.
Well,
Even any hit, and a lot of distributors passed.
Even at home, we couldn't get a broadcast deal. And at the time, I think the traditional independent model within the UK, going back to 2010, was you had to have a broadcaster involved. Because unless you had money in from Film4 or or the BBC, you would just not be able to make the finance work at the sort of $15 million range that we did. I mean, the question of how much power to give your equity players, I think it's very similar to any of the key relationships you have with your money, and that doesn't matter whether it's a sales agent that you took them a silk purse with the dream cast, and because of timing, schedules, things falling over, you've actually given them a sow's ear, and it's gone from Tom Hardy to Bob Hardy. So that's a really important relationship with your sales team. If you have pre-sold, and normally it's your domestic market you look to first. So if I've sold to E1 or any of the Studio Canal or any of the guys in the UK, that's a big risk that they've taken on our ability to deliver the film that we've promised to them. So the notion that you have these sort of fanged financiers that sit over you and will get you to cast their daughter and come up with all sort of crazy ideas doesn't really exist apart from in one space. And the one thing I would urge and caution is that if you are going to high net worths to try and get equity into your film, chances are someone that's acquired a lot of money has done two things. One, they're very good at not giving it away, and it is going to be an uphill battle to try and get them to invest. The second thing is it means that they've been very successful in another part of life. And the overbearing confidence that brings, that they can solve all of the woes of the film industry, is a really big thing. So people who have smashed it in tech think they can fix film. People who have been the best orthodontists in the world think that they can fix film, and that is where it sometimes gets a bit awkward.
Definitely sound like you're speaking from experience.
No, I'll be very candid with you. I had two Serbian investors in a film a little while ago. They'd come from Serbian banking. They were in the FX and commodities market. They had made multi-millions of pounds for themselves, and they thought that they were film guys. And all they were there really to do was to cut a check and let me make the movie. And they did get overbearing at times, but it's tricky within that.
No, you're right. And there is when we work, we have a pool of investors that fund our transactions, if you like, our loans, the opportunities that we find, and we don't provide equity. Equity is an emotional investment, and that's where you can run into big problems if everyone isn't actually going in the same direction. The investors that we have are very much guys or ladies who would otherwise put their money into property or whatever else. The key for us is always that we educate them before we start working with them, so that they understand the way we work, and once they understand that, we don't have those kind of problems. And if they don't understand that, we won't work with them.
What is bespoke financing?
I suppose a bit like bespoke tailoring, isn't it? It's why do we say we do that? Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, your website.
I knew
I'm
that
an American.
all along, yeah. Bespoke means not off the peg. It means that you don't even know what that means, do you? Okay, fine. If you go to Marks and Spencer's and you buy a suit, it's off the peg, okay? If you go to Savile Row, you get bespoke tailoring.
Okay, gotcha.
So bespoke financing means that we understand how films are put together because we do it ourselves as producers. And we have experience as distributors. I have experience running a fund for the government. We tailor the kind of deals that we do to the needs of the film. We're very producer friendly.
Rename Radiant. Bespoke sales.
We're flexible. We don't go into a film saying this is the way we work. You've got to change everything you do to fit us. We look. Sometimes it works. Sometimes we can fit into a film. Sometimes we can't. But we will, if we want to help a project, we will do everything we can to fit in the most comfortable way possible with what's already there, especially as we're the kind of financier that comes in late in the game.
I mean, I would say the opposite to that, which might aid the understanding, is, for example, if you're working with a bank. So if you're working with Union Bank of America as your lender, they come in and you know how they're going to price your tax credits, you know what they're going to give you as a gap ceiling, you'll know all of the specifics they will need on the point of financial closing. And it's a checkbox experience when you're working with a bank. When you're working with a facility like Fizz, or I won't mention your competition whilst you're on the same stage, but it is a project by project basis, and you go with the material, with the package, with your suggested sort of sales values if you haven't got a sales agent, and you look at where things can be tweaked and adjusted to make it work for the film. That's the big difference.
So is North America helping put films together? Is it possible to pre-sell North America, or is it difficult now? How important is North America? It used to be very important.
I mean, I would say in the area that we're talking, it's the holy grail.
Hard to get then.
And hard to get. And there are a number of very credible financial institutions and sales agents that will back their own belief in the project. Something that's becoming a bit more emergent is these backstop deals, where you won't actually sell.
Explain that, yeah.
Okay, so the way a backstop deal is that, okay, I've got a film, Steel Country, that's going to shoot in Atlanta next year. I need $6 million. I've raised 50% as equity from a finance house. Not Serbian this time, no, Croatian.
No,
no, they're actually an American outfit, and so that's giving me 50% of the equity. I know I have the benefit of the state credit down in Georgia. By the time you've got the exclusions and stuff, it's actually about 18% on how we structured our film. Because we're prepping and posting in the UK, I've got the UK tax credit. I'm left with a gap position of about 10% and a sort of pre-sales position of about, I don't know, another 10% or so. So I'm discussing a backstop deal at the moment where a financier will come in and say, okay, we want the film to be made, we love the cast, we love your timing, we think it's going to work really well, we like the sales agent that you're proposing to work with. Rather than you have the film fall over, because you're now going out to cast and you're saying shoot dates Feb, March, rather than the film falling over and us not getting to work on it with you, we'll create a backstop deal, which basically means the money's there, so you can close the film, the bond can go at risk, you can make your movie. But we ask that from the point that you're ready to deliver the film, you have a 60-day window to try and basically get our money out of the picture, to find someone that will pick it up at acquisition stage. So it means you have enough money to close and make the movie, but ultimately they're hoping that you're actually going to sell on their piece for them and come out with fees.
And I know that only as part against the US. Is that what you're...
Yeah, they seem to be the main, because it's one of the most robust territories, and they know that if Radiant or I Am Global or Film Nation go on paper and they say, okay, here's a value against the US, that those numbers can be trusted fairly well.
There are also 2 or 3 US distributors who will give you backstop deals, depending on the kind of film.
Who are they?
I don't want to say who they are because it's their own commercial terms that work, but there are certain distributors who will say they'll take the film but will allow you to buy them out with a bit of a premium if you then go, and some of the agencies are helpful in putting those together as well. If you then get it, once the film is seen, so what it will do, it will allow an agency to rep the film in the US, knowing that if they don't actually get the deal that you need, there is a minimum level that's helped make the film. For instance, my company would put money up against the US if we knew that there was a backstop arrangement in place. So
Does that allow you to raise the budget and make it bigger?
No, it usually allows you to meet the strike price and actually get the film made. It doesn't necessarily allow you to raise the budget.
And there's another component of it which sometimes includes a screen commitment. And that from a pre-sales point of view is very interesting, because if you can get a backstop deal that has a minimum screen commitment, if it's a large enough number, 1,000 or more screens in the US, then that significantly helps your pre-sales. And then you still have the position of, once you're showing the film, if you can get a better deal or more lucrative or more screens or whatever, that you can sell it. But it's an interesting model, the US backstop. We've had it on a number of our films, and it's the only way the financing has come together.
I should actually add, we had an offer on our little film that's playing here from Latin America. That was contingent upon a certain size of release in the US. But you get to the point sometimes where you think, okay, well, how much is it going to cost to release in the US on a limited number of screens? And if we put the money up for that limited number of screens, will we see that reflected in an increased international sales value? So is it actually worth us doing that ourselves and saying, okay, we'll guarantee it?
This is exactly where I was going. I was wondering how important a theatrical release is in today's market in terms of branding a movie and giving it an identity. Reviews.
I think in certain territories incredibly important, and I think in a number of those territories incredibly important for them to see what it's doing in either the domestic market or the US. So your home territory and what's happening in the States. I mean, just going back very briefly to what you just mentioned about does it give you more money to make the film? I mean, one of the things that I always try and impart at these sort of events is bigger is never best. You know, you might sort of see the dollar signs and think, Christ, if we just have another $500,000, you know, you're not going to make a palpably different film for that. You're still going to make the film you started out by wanting to make. You're just going to sit behind another chunk of someone else's money. And so something that I always try and promote is be really, really rigorous in your budgeting and pricing of your movie. And you should only really be making a film for the bare minimum it takes to get it made in the manner in which you want to do it.
I would say for me, the exception to that rule is if you can throw money in the cast line, and that gets you the kind of cast that a sales agent will then say, okay. I mean, again, using the film here as an example that I'm with, there was a certain point in the casting process, because the film is like under £1 million, where we just thought, you know what, why don't we just put another £1 million or dollars in the budget, we'll go and offer that to a big name, and for a film that then costs £1.5–2 million, we'll get a sales agent who gives us the kind of sales estimates where we can raise that money. So it's just getting over that threshold, and that in a sense for me is the sort of essence of the micro to medio thing. It's not necessarily about what budget level is micro, what budget level is medio. It's crossing that threshold that transforms a film from purely execution dependent into something that distributors and sales agents will look at on paper and say, I can put a value to it. And that generally comes down to either cast or, if you want, a star director.
But if we go back a bit, it also comes down to having a really good screenplay to begin with.
But you don't even get to the first base without that.
Yeah, and I would second that, because my buyers on the international side will be interested in a budget range to a certain extent, but they will be very interested in the cast. So the only place where I would suggest as producers to put a little more money in, if you can, is if you're getting cast out of it, because that's really ultimately the only thing that matters. If you have your production, I mean, the basic costs are covered.
And festivals are important too, having the quality and branding a movie at a festival, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they're a focal point. You know, they're a focal point for the industry press, they're a focal point for the consumer press, and it's a really good way of sort of breaking the film for the first time. I mean, historically, TIFF has got a wonderful reputation of sort of spotting, you know, awardsy films. But I think, you know, what's becoming really interesting is Sundance, South by Southwest, some of the other smaller, cooler festivals are starting to have their own prominence. And I think some of the cooler titles are the ones that are releasing in festivals that don't necessarily have a market attached. They just seem to have a slightly different vibe. It's for the art rather than it being the more commercial side of things. So if you can get a film made for the right price and into one of those really cool sort of more festival-driven, creative-driven festivals that quite quickly then rolls into your next one, which happens to have a nice back market around it. That's a really good sort of design in terms of your sort of festival programming.
But even the festivals these days have succumbed more and more to commercial constraints, and they all rely on sponsorship. They all need stars to go on the red carpet, and there are less and less festivals that fall into that category. I think the sort of life of festivals is slightly cyclical, and TIFF has actually been pretty consistent and stable throughout all the years that I've known it and been coming. But you know, when I first went to Sundance, I was one of 5 or 6 European buyers there, and it was a one-horse town, and I discovered Paul Thomas Anderson and Bryan Singer in one festival. That would never happen now. It's swarming. Anything that's interesting there has already been snapped up pretty much. It's very rare, and it's really, even if there are discoveries to be made, some little producer from England ain't going to be the one that's making it. That's for sure these days. They're huge festivals now, and so what one is looking for is the emergence all the time of what is the next festival that is like Sundance was 20 years ago. You know, is it Tribeca, or is it whatever else?
Well, let's open it up for questions. I'm sure you have a million of them. I have more, but
Go ahead.
Just thanks again for coming in. And just about the backstop, because this is the first time I'm hearing it. Can you sort of explain the differentiation between the backstop and, say, bridge financing? Because it sounds like the backstop is less secure than bridge in some ways.
It is. I mean, the way that most of you done the financing day, so if we start chucking around terms like gap, bridge and stuff, yeah, okay. I mean, bridge is normally secured against some paper. So the idea of a backstop deal is that there is no paper in place. It's just the fact that the lender has the confidence that, based on the sales estimates, that in the life of the film and its successful completion, it will have a market value that can be sold on. And that's obviously different from gap financing, which is just traditionally a bit of bank lending.
So it'd be first out, but with costs and fees associated with it.
Not necessarily first out, because if you've got any gap provision within there, then gap normally comes out ahead of that. And bear in mind, it is actually a promise to come good on that money. So if you haven't got that replaced, then they're on the hook, and that'll be it. I mean, I'm only recently sort of coming across, and Robert's a bit more sophisticated when it comes to sort of the more sophisticated level of financing, which includes backstop deals, but yeah, with regards sales.
But all of the backstop deals that we've come across are specifically against the U.S. sales rights, so they are, that's what they're covering. Yeah.
Hi. To follow up on the backstop issue, the money is being loaned to you by investors or by the bank, or is it either one?
I'll just say, I mean, it really depends where there are two backstop instances I can think of which are different. One is that you will get a distributor who likes the project to commit to being there, or either taking the project but allowing you to take it back if you get a better offer. The second is to have a third party put up either an amount of money that they will guarantee, or it may be a P&A spend or something that you can take to someone and say, look, worst case scenario, we've got this. So it's kind of horses for courses. You can't, there's no hard and fast, but banks will not usually get involved in that kind of thing. They're far too cautious. And by the way, bridge financing is my definition of bridge financing anyway, is the financing that someone puts up, and it's very expensive money to help a film carry on or get to the point where the financing, the proper, can close, and that money will carry anything, a premium of anything from 50 to 100%, because if the film collapses, the money's down the toilet.
And the idea is that it's very short term.
Very short term, yeah, and very expensive.
The idea, yes.
Actually, my question is, can you talk about, because I know I'm with my producer for a film that I'm hopefully directing next year, can you talk about like hiring like an actor that isn't a name actor yet, but sort of on the verge of blowing up and maybe going to the A level, but you may not be able to get the same level of financing? Does that make sense, or does it just make sense to just try to find the money and get the name actor?
Depends on your budget, really. What's the, I think as Gareth said, what's the price of your film? If you've got to start off by pricing the film. You've got an above the line, you've got a below the line. If you know that you can make, leaving the cast aside, you've got to know what that film's going to cost to make. If it's a superhero film, and the below the line is $125 million, you're going to need something above the line to help you get there, or a studio at least. Or if it's that's a bad example. But if it's a film that below the line is going to, whatever happens, in the best case scenario, is going to cost you $10 million below the line because of
like
the
a period piece
or something with a lot of action or effects or something. There's no point in having $10 million below the line and $1 million above the line. You're never going to get there. So, but if you know that worst case scenario you can make that film for $3 million below the line, then maybe you've got more options. Maybe you don't have to spend $5 million above the line to get a big cast. Maybe you can bring that down. So it's just really trying to move the pieces around.
And part of that sort of 3D chess that exists is also the timing of when you want to make the film or when you need to make the film. Because if you need to go quickly because your investors are ready to go and they're going to do, they're doing some tax-based investment that has to clear out within a calendar year so they get their various release, you start to work in the world of best available. And you might get through a lot of names and go quite quickly. If you've got 5 years to keep searching for that one star and tracking people through their prior TV careers and you think they're on the cusp of greatness and getting them at that point, that's going to be a very, very long process.
Yeah, just, I mean, on that very point, on the example of Patch of Fog, we had a window. We knew that we had to shoot by, or get into at least by Christmas last year. And there was a certain point where we had, I don't know what it was, a 6-week window where we could have thrown some money at the cast. So in the best of all worlds, it's going to take at least 2 weeks to get a response from a bigger name, usually more. So you kind of think, okay, I've got 6 weeks, maybe I get 2 or 3 bites of the cherry. And then if that doesn't work, back to plan A.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you guys to talk Haitian. About just a lot of films happening between countries. And what like a microfilm, for example, in India could be 100,000 and less. But we have a lot of co-productions happening with Europe. Maybe you guys could talk more from your experience about when you work between countries, like we can discover sometimes very good, very well-known actors that cost very little between countries, or when you're trying to make a film for a smaller budget, you can leverage the co-production by working in a place that costs less, or, so all those angles and working between countries, how that can help.
I mean, I've done a couple of pictures that worked under different co-production treaties. Zaytoon was the first film to go through the Israeli-UK co-production treaty and had to sit alongside a French-Israeli co-production treaty, so we're using 2 bilateral treaties. I think one of the problems with navigating those things, you have to really, really understand why you're doing it, because you will be needing to give away something. It might be bringing in a domestic or a foreign producer, so there's going to be a split on all your fees and a co-share on the project itself. I think, the nature that you can make, that you are able to make a film for $10 million in one country and go and make it for $1 million in a different country is a falsehood. I think you are making the same film. But one thing you can do as producers is really start to learn to navigate all of those incidental benefits, like the soft money sources, like the tax credits, whether they exist in your origin territory where you're making the film, or where you might be using it as a foreign location. And there is a number of really, really good guides to those international incentives. I mean, Screen do one once a year where they update it, and that's something that's really good to sort of keep on top of.
But they tried to get Steve Jobs to be shot in Romania, and they insisted on doing it in San Francisco. I mean, what are the risks of shooting for the wrong reasons on a cheap location?
I think the problem is that it's there's the obvious, which is depth of talent base, additional cost. If you're trying to get Romania to look like San Francisco, you're going to have to be paying for a load of cars, set dressing, street furniture. So I always really advocate that you can't let the financial benefit wag as the tail of the creative dog. I did a panel at Cannes 2 years ago, which I think the chap at the front was at, and there was this promotion of chasing the free money around the world, and it was like, let's go and try and make something that just makes absolutely no sense to go and shoot somewhere different.
All right. Did you have an answer to that? No? Okay. Here we go.
No. I mean, I think Gareth said it. We had. I don't think the cast part. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's great fun if you actually are going to do something with another country. It's great fun to try and think about how what kind of talent that country could bring to the table.
Slumdog Millionaire comes to mind.
Slumdog Millionaire. I mean, there's lots of examples of films that have introduced to the world actors that were already well known in their own countries, none of which come to my head at this point in time, but you've already made an example. But yeah, I think that's a real benefit. But I think Gareth's absolutely right that you have to, making a film is all about partnering up with people who share the same vision. and it's not, you don't want to be in a situation where suddenly, like when you go to Cannes every year, the restaurants put up their Cannes menu, which is twice the price of the normal menu. You don't want to be going to a country and thinking that you're going to be giving yourself benefits that actually don't exist. And I'm at the moment doing that kind of shopping for a production that we're planning, and it's first and foremost about, can the location give us what we want? Can the country that we're going in give us, as you said, the crew talent that we need? We know in this country you won't give us the acting talent because it's too small a country and doesn't necessarily have those actors. But and then, does it make sense economically? Is it giving us the kind of benefits that will make a $12 million film into a $9 million film, and therefore work?
I mean, we had a great benefit in kind arrangement with the Jordanian Armed Forces when we did Kajaki out in Jordan. One of the things that was established very early on is they're keen to promote it as a destination of choice for filmmaking, and they just opened the doors. So we had choppers, we had trucks, the logistics corps blasted a road into the set we were filming at, and I was asked by the Royal Jordanian Film Commission to put a price on it, and I said, well, we probably got between $300,000 and $500,000 of benefit in kind. So sometimes those opportunities will present themselves in some of the exotic locations that are really cool.
There's a lot of countries, Colombia is being very aggressive now about bringing people down.
I do think you have to be a little careful, like when Louisiana started their tax rebate system, about 2 years into it, I had the buyers come and say, please don't tell me that this film is shot in Louisiana. I have seen everything, every bayou, every corner of New Orleans. So I think you have to make sure that the location also has some integrity with your story as opposed to just being cheaper. On the cast question, we had, I sold last year Hungry Hearts, which was Alba Rohrbacher, who was really well known in Italy, not very well known outside of Italy, partnered in a film with Adam Driver. And that was really, really interesting because people knew Adam Driver or are getting to know Adam Driver and realize of Star Wars, everyone will know Adam Driver. And that was interesting because it was introducing, certainly, I think probably at the moment, one of the finest young actresses in Italy to the rest of the world. Nobody knew her. And she's superb. So there is that possibility, and I think it lends some interesting new faces to film. So I think there's a possibility of those co-productions on the cast side being interesting.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I have a two-part question. The first one is for you, Mimi. Let's say there's a project that's, let's say it's about $2 million or less, and it clearly cannot afford to get the big name actor or actress aboard. How do you, in your position as a sales agent, sort of track that based on the cast? If it has great cast on it, but the names are just not big enough for you to commit as the sales agent for pre-sale, how do you track that project and sort of maintain the interest and maintain the potential for business with the producers without committing to the project because you don't want to do that?
We've handled a number of projects that I have found really interesting that aren't completely cast dependent. For me, it goes to the screenplay. I have to understand, I have to like the screenplay, and I have to understand from a business point of view, who's the audience? Does it have a demographic? Because many, unfortunately, of these smaller passion pieces, I'm like, I don't know other than your mother who wants to see this. So it has to be clear what is the business model at any level, I think. And to me, the story has to be good. And then I have to understand the cast being good creative choices, that I understand where it's going, even if it's not big stars. The piece of it, though, is we track it, but it's very hard, if not impossible, to do pre-sales on those. So the financing model has to work without pre-sales, and we all have to understand that it's execution dependent. So that is everybody, the producer and probably the producer's fee, and the financing recoupment are all really on the line until we see what is this film, because you aren't pre-selling it, you aren't covering any of your risk early on. So we do a lot of them, very selectively though, but we do have those kinds of films, but it has to be the right project, and I have to understand who's eventually going to want to see it if it turns out well.
I see. Okay. And then the second part of the question, very quickly, I'll put it out. It's a question about, do you prefer, as potential financiers, this question is for the gentleman, if there's some financing already in place, or would you prefer to bring your own financing because you do not want to deal with returns the financing they're already in place has?
It's a project by project thing, and I mean, you know, it's great sometimes when the producer has put a piece of the puzzle in place, and I won't restrict that to finance. You know, if a producer comes to Bedlam and they've got an idea for a project and they've attached a bit of cast, you know, that's great. They might have a personal relationship with someone, or that they're bringing in a director, or it might be access to material that they can't get, but I'm excited by. So, for example, I went after a young adult book series a little while back, and you know, the access point for the producer that I then agreed to afford a co-producer credit with was the fact that, you know, she was busy mates with the writer. And so, you know, if you can do some part of that, and just pointing to Mimi's last response as well, I mean, you know, a lot of producers see development as only being about the words on the page and getting the script home. Absolutely, that's very important, but part of the producer's responsibility when you're developing a project is to know the audience, have a sense of how the financing is going to come together, have a sense of the profile and possible release strategy. And when you come to producers like us, and you've got that down verbatim and the pitch includes all those, you think, you know what, I'm possibly going to be working with someone who's really thinking here. This isn't just, it's a cute script, you like it, sort of thing. For $30 million.
Yeah, we get those too.
I think.
I'm afraid we have to end this. It's been wonderful.
Can I just say
go
one?
ahead,
Can I quickly impart one thought? Because we spent the entire time talking about the importance of cast and how we never get it moved to the next level without cast. But I was in a meeting at lunchtime with an Australian at the Australian stand, and if you are looking, you know, there are films that don't rely on cast to be successful. And there are genres that don't rely so much on cast to be successful. And it's worth, if you're looking to make, you know, we're all essentially in the same boat as independent filmmakers, however many films we've done or their success with. As I say, you're always kind of starting from scratch. And it's worth thinking about, am I trying to make something that is already being made with big names anyway, or should I try and make something that doesn't necessarily rely on those big names? And I was just pointed out a couple of examples of films. One, a family film, which had no cast, which had been a massive success in Australia, and one, if you like, an over 55 sort of Best Exotic Marigold Hotel type audience, which had also been a massive success in Australia without any real notable cast. And it's worth, as a producer, I'm not saying as a writer or necessarily, maybe you would want to think like that, but it's worth as a producer thinking about that as an option as well. And of course there's always horror, if you like.
I'm going to bring up a genre question, but I figure everybody already knows this. Well, it's an option. It's an option. All right, thank you all.